I think Western air power would absolutely cause President Putin to stop and think. And therefore, that is the way I think we would be best able to secure the future, because Western air power would be, I think, Putin's kryptonite.
Let's return to our top story. As you've been hearing from us, some significant news on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Britain and France have committed to deploying troops to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. They'll be backed by the US. Keir Starmer, President Macron and President Zelensky signed a declaration of intent to put boots on the ground as part of security guarantees agreed upon at a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. And that's made up of about 35 European states. Let's hear from Keir Starmer.
We signed a declaration of intent on the deployment of forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. This is a vital part of our ironcast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term. It paves the way for the legal framework under which British, French and partner forces could operate on Ukrainian soil, securing Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerating Ukraine's armed forces for the future. We discussed these issues in detail today, and so I can say that following a ceasefire, the UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine and build protected facilities for weapons and military equipment to support Ukraine's defensive needs.
OK, supporting Ukraine's defensive needs is the aim there. Sean Bell joins us, former Air Vice-Marshal in the RAF and a military analyst. Sean, good evening to you.
Good evening, Kate.
What does that look like then, I suppose, is my question, Sean, supporting Ukraine's defensive needs, troops on the ground in Ukraine from France and, crucially, from Britain as well?
Yeah, there was scant on detail, wasn't there? I think it is worth pointing out to everybody, this is in the post-conflict time. Security guarantees will be vital for President Zelensky. He won't just take a signature on a bit of paper. Ukraine agreed that in 1994 when they gave up their nuclear weapons. And when Russia ripped up that agreement 20 years later, I'm afraid the West, the UK and America did not rush to its aid. So there'll have to be something more robust. And I think this was an important step forward. But I have to say, I've been sort of commentating on this conflict for some years. I've been out to Ukraine a few times myself. Does this put us any closer to peace? I don't think so. Somebody captured it well today. They said peace won't flow directly from the meeting today, but peace would not be possible without the results of this meeting today. But crucially, Russia wasn't involved. President Putin is showing no evidence whatsoever of getting involved in peace negotiations. And even MI6 said it doesn't look likely he's close to negotiating anytime soon.
The other question on the flip side of that is whether this will anger Vladimir Putin and derail any potential peace deal that he might have been about to agree to.
Yeah, quite possibly. It's very difficult to tell, isn't it? I have to say that it's very difficult to look at these set of talks in isolation from what President Trump's been doing across in Venezuela, and particularly the threats to Greenland, which, of course, is owned by Denmark, a fellow NATO member. And that's called into question the whole relationship of the US to Europe, to NATO, and commitment to Europe as well. And given that our national security policy is based on a NATO first principle, I wonder whether today's talks, represented by all the leaders of Europe, which is unusual, they normally join by Zoom, was as much the agenda to try and keep America on side and to keep Steve Witkoff aligned, keep President Trump involved in the conversation, demonstrate a commitment by Europe to be a bit more forward-leaning. And therefore, that was probably the main agenda for today. Possibly nothing actually to do with bringing peace closer in Ukraine. Maybe I'm being a cynic, but it's very difficult to see this out of context.
Yeah, and actually the US has agreed for the first time. It was important to look demonstrative to the US, to make it look visual, to make it look real, to make it look practical by the Coalition of the Willing Nations. But in return, the US has agreed for the first time to support the force, peacekeeping force, however we want to describe them, in case of attack. That is significant. This is the first time that we've had any confirmation of concrete security guarantees, a ceasefire deal backed for the first time by the United States.
No, you're right, Kate. And like all these things, it's incremental steps, isn't it? But when we talk about boots on the ground, let's just set this into context. Most military analysts believe that you need around 200,000 troops. It's a huge country, Ukraine, a huge long border with Russia. If the UK was to commit 10% of that number, given it's a rotation, to every 4 months, 6 months, you'd have to rotate them. We'd need 60,000 troops total. That's pretty much the whole size of the British Army. In other words, we'd be having a full-time commitment only to Ukraine. And that would only provide 10% of the troops. France might be able to do the same. Germany, maybe. Poland's not going to do that because they're going to be more worried about their own security. And I think it's very unlikely America would put down a large deposit of troops when it's trying to move troops out of Europe at the moment. Interestingly, they talked about air, land and sea, scant on detail. I think it's an important commitment, but actually there's a load of detail that's missing here. And actually, frankly, providing a robust force is going to be very difficult for Europe to do.
Yeah, and actually the US providing air cover, which is what's been suggested or requested before, is a really interesting thing to think about, because that is a pretty large, that would mean the US has a pretty large part to play here.
Yeah, and I think I'm a former air power guy, and I have to say the frustration is that I think Western air power is the one asymmetric advantage that the West has against Russia. Russia is meant to be a major superpower. In reality, its air force has been singularly incapable of controlling the skies over Ukraine. And I think Western air power would absolutely cause President Putin to stop and think. And therefore, that is the way I think we would be best able to secure the future, because Western air power would be, I think, Putin's kryptonite. I think it would be a very powerful way. And of course, the US is preeminent, top trumps in every area of air power. So I think whilst we get attracted to the headlines of boots on the ground, I think there are other ways in which a robust security guarantees could be provided, utilising our West's asymmetric advantage, particularly in air and space power.
Okay, interesting. Look, really good to hear from you, Sean. Thank you for spending some time with us. Former Air Vice-Marshal in the RAF and military analyst Sean Bell there. Thank you.
It's important that we're starting the year like this. European and American allies, side by side with President Zelensky, standing for peace. And we are closer to that goal than ever. But of course, the hardest yards are still ahead. We've had a very constructive meeting, which is built on the excellent progress made in negotiations over recent days and weeks. The purpose of the Coalition of the Willing is to help deliver a peace that can last, and to work with the US to guarantee Ukraine's security for the long term. This work is now more advanced than ever. Today's joint declaration set that out in clear terms. On top of that, and alongside President Zelensky and President Macron, we went even further today. We signed a declaration of intent on the deployment of forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. This is a vital part of our ironcast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term. It paves the way for the legal framework under which British, French and partner forces could operate on Ukrainian soil, securing Ukraine's skies and seas, and regenerating Ukraine's armed forces for the future. We discussed these issues in detail today, and so I can say that following a ceasefire, the UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine and build protected facilities for weapons and military equipment to support Ukraine's defensive needs. And with our coalition partners, we've also agreed significant further steps. First, that we will participate in US-led monitoring and verification of any ceasefire. Second, we will support the long-time provision of armaments for Ukraine's defence. And third, we will work towards binding commitments to support Ukraine in the case of a future armed attack by Russia. This is all about building the practical foundations on which peace would rest. We will continue to step out our support for Ukraine's defence in 2026 to ensure it gets the equipment and backing it needs to continue the fight. And we will keep the pressure up on Russia, including further measures on oil traders and shadow fleet operators funding Putin's war chest. We will continue these efforts until they come to the table in good faith and until we realise the goal that we all share of a just and lasting peace.